In the fourth book of his private notebook, written somewhere on campaign and never intended for anyone else's eyes, Marcus Aurelius stops in the middle of an argument to list names. Camillus, Caeso, Volesus, Leonnatus. Men who had once been as famous in Rome as any name could be, already fading from memory in his own lifetime. He adds a few names closer to his own era, Scipio and Cato, even Augustus, and says, plainly, that the same erosion is starting to happen to them too. This is not a passing complaint scribbled in a bad mood. It is the emperor of Rome, ruler of roughly a fifth of the known world, deliberately reminding himself, in his own handwriting, that fame does not last, not even his own. Today we're going to walk through Marcus's actual argument for why being forgotten isn't the tragedy it feels like, the specific moves he used to take the fear out of it, and why that fear might be quietly steering more of your life than you've noticed. Marcus had more reason than almost anyone alive to care about being remembered. His face was stamped onto coins that circulated across 3 continents. Statues of him stood in provincial forums he would never personally visit. Senators and generals who had never met him could still recognize his profile on sight, the way a modern face becomes familiar from currency and portraiture long before anyone actually meets the person behind it. He was, by any ordinary measure, about as famous as a human being could be in the ancient world, and he had every reason to expect that fame would outlast him by centuries, which is exactly what makes it strange that he spent so much private ink talking himself out of caring. He was not a failed man rationalizing an absence of recognition, the way it's easy to dismiss the philosophy of anyone telling you fame doesn't matter after they've already failed to get any. He was possibly the single most famous man alive, telling himself, in a notebook no one else was meant to read, that the thing he already had in abundance was never worth building a life around. 1. The Vanishing Names. Marcus starts with evidence, not argument. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Words which were once current are now obsolete. So also the names of men once famous are now in a manner antiquated. Camillus, Caeso, Volesus, Leonnatus, and a little after, Scipio and Cato, then Augustus too, and then Hadrian and Antoninus." Read that list slowly, because these were not minor figures. Camillus was remembered as a second founder of Rome. Cato was a byword for incorruptible virtue for generations after his death. And Marcus is watching their names already going soft at the edges within a few hundred years. Not erased overnight, just quietly thinning out of common use, the way a word falls out of a language one generation at a time until nobody under 40 recognizes it at all. Picture trying to name the most famous person alive exactly 100 years before you were born. Most people can't do it without help. Now push back another 100 years. The gap between impossible to imagine forgetting and requires a search engine is smaller than it feels from the inside of your own moment. And Marcus is doing the exercise on his own contemporaries while they are still very much alive to read it. He isn't reaching for obscure trivia to make the point land. He's naming the equivalent, for a Roman reader, of pulling out a list of once unmissable names and watching the room struggle to place them. Proof that the erosion isn't a hypothetical future threat, but a process already visibly underway, mid-sentence, in the very names he's using as his example.
2. The fame you're chasing already belongs to a dead man. Marcus doesn't stop at noticing that names fade. He works out the actual mechanism, and it's colder than the observation alone. In the same notebook, Marcus Aurelius put it more bluntly. He who has a vehement desire for posthumous fame does not consider that every one of those who remember him will himself also die very soon. Follow the chain he's pointing at. You are not just hoping to be remembered by people. You are hoping to be remembered by specific people who are themselves aging toward the same forgetting you are, and who will hand your memory off, if they bother at all, to a next generation with even less reason to care. Picture a man who spends decades building a reputation meant to outlive him, imagining some distant future audience nodding at his name with respect. That audience does not yet exist,
will itself die within a normal lifespan of encountering his name, and will pass along whatever thin remainder survives to a generation even further removed from ever having known him personally. He isn't just chasing a fading signal, he's chasing a signal being relayed by people who are fading right alongside it. Picture the modern version of the same chase, someone curating a public record of their life, the achievements listed, the photos kept, the accounts that will supposedly stand as a monument once they're gone, as if a follower count today were a binding promise. A promise from strangers decades from now who haven't even been born yet and who owe the dead nothing at all. Every one of those future custodians of your memory is, right now, either not yet alive or already busy forgetting someone else's grandfather. 3. Soon you will forget. Soon you will be forgotten. Here, Marcus turns the whole argument around and points it back at the reader. And this is the line people quote most because it cuts both directions at once. He put it even more starkly, turning the argument back on the reader. In a little while thou wilt have forgotten all things. In a little while all things will have forgotten thee. Notice it isn't only a warning about your own obituary. It's a warning about your own memory, running the exact same way right now. Picture the argument that consumed an entire weekend 2 years ago, the one that felt, at the time, like it might define a friendship for good. Try to recall, specifically, what it was even about. Most people can't. You have already run the forgetting half of Marcus's line on dozens of things that once felt permanent, and you didn't experience it as a tragedy while it happened. It just quietly stopped mattering, the way almost everything eventually does, including, Marcus insists, whatever version of you is currently worried about being remembered by someone else. Widen the frame further, and it gets stranger still. Somewhere in your own past is a version of you that felt, with total certainty, that some specific worry would never fully leave. A job, a breakup, a mistake replayed on a loop. And that version of you was wrong every single time, because you are living proof that the forgetting eventually won. Marcus is not describing a fate that happens to other people's memories. He is describing the machine you have already watched run, from the inside, more times than you could count. 4. What's left when fame isn't the point? If Marcus stopped here, this would just be a bleak observation about erosion. He doesn't stop here. He offers an actual alternative to build a life around instead of a reputation. And it comes from watching something that doesn't seem to care about being noticed at all. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, a man when he has done a good act does not call out for others to come and see, but goes on to another act, as a vine goes on to produce again the grapes in season. A vine does not pause after one harvest to check whether anyone praised it. It simply produces again, because producing is what it is for, not because an audience is keeping score. Marcus's answer to the fear of being forgotten is not to stop acting well. It's to stop attaching the acting to the remembering in the first place. To do the right thing in front of you today because it is the right thing, full stop. The same way the vine bears fruit, whether or not a single person walks past to admire it. Picture someone who helps a struggling coworker with no plan to mention it later, who raises a child with patience nobody will ever write a book about, who does careful, honest work that will be quietly replaced by newer work within a decade. None of it needs an audience to have been worth doing. That was Marcus's actual answer to his own list of vanishing names. Not despair, and not a harder campaign for a longer-lasting fame, but a quiet redirection of the entire question. From, will this be remembered, to, was this actually good? That was always the only version of the question a vine, or a person, could ever really answer for themselves. 5. The irony Marcus never got to see. Here is the detail Marcus himself never lived to find out, and it sharpens everything above it rather than undoing it. He wrote his notebook for an audience of exactly one, himself, working through his own fear of vanishing, with no plan for anyone else to ever open the pages. It survived by accident, copied by monks who had their own reasons for preserving it, passed hand to hand through centuries that lost far more manuscripts than they kept, printed centuries later, and now sitting, translated into dozens of languages, in more hands today than at any point since he wrote it. The man who told himself fame was not worth chasing became, without trying to, one of the most durably remembered figures from the entire ancient world, nearly 2,000 years past the point where he expected Hadrian and Antoninus to already sound antiquated. But notice what actually produced that outcome. It wasn't a campaign for legacy. It was the opposite, a private, unperformed act of trying to think honestly, with no audience in mind, which turned out centuries later to be exactly the kind of thing worth reading. Compare that to the version of this chase you can watch happening in real time now. Work built specifically to be noticed tends to expire the moment the platform or the trend that carried it does, while work built for its own sake, with no audience in mind, is the version that occasionally, unpredictably, outlasts its maker. Marcus wasn't rewarded for chasing the outcome. He got the outcome precisely because he'd stopped chasing it. So the fear of being forgotten, for Marcus, was never really about death. It was about which question you let run your life while you're still very much alive to answer it. Camillus and Caeso didn't fail at something. They simply lived out the same arc every name eventually lives out. And Marcus, staring straight at his own version of that arc, chose to spend his energy on the vine's question instead of the audience's question. Ask yourself, honestly, how much of what you did this week was aimed at being remembered for it? And how much would you have done anyway, with identical care, if you knew for certain no one would ever mention it again? Marcus never promised that second kind of action would make you famous. He promised it was the only kind that was ever actually yours to control, name or no name, remembered or not. If this gave you a way to stop measuring your life by what gets remembered, subscribe to Above Average, where we explore the psychology and philosophy of the thinkers who saw what most people never do. Thanks for watching.